welcome to the Business Brunch. This morning we have representatives from the B4 Property Hub, Mike Jennings from Jennings of Garsington. We've got Rowan Waller, or Rowan Wally Waller, as he prefers to be known as of 1st of April, from Estate Agents. And we've got Jonathan Finnerty of Green Unit. Morning, gents.
Morning.
Morning.
How are we all?
We're
Very good.
very good, thank you, on this April Fool's Day.
Excellent. You had any pranks yet so far, Jonathan?
Not yet, but I know that there's going to be one in this call.
Do you?
What is?
That's part of my imagination now. I might have to
It's being chaired by you, Richard. I can't believe that we're going to go through without a prank.
You'd be thinking my pranks happen sort of naturally. They're not premeditated. So today we're going to be talking about the future of the office and where working for you is going to be best for you, basically. I know you've all got lots of thoughts on this particular topic. Yesterday, Pricewaterhouse announced that basically their staff could work wherever they wanted to, whenever they wanted to, with certain restrictions, like knocking off early on a Friday during the summer. Nationwide have basically said to their 13,000 employees they can work anywhere. So, Mike, I'll go to you first. What are your thoughts about the future of the office, where you can work and where's good for you to work, basically, as in an employee?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Just talking about Pricewaterhouse, it just reminded me of, I think it was Richard Branson with the Virgin Group many years ago, announcing that his staff can take as much holiday as they want. And
as long as they took it on a Virgin plane on a Virgin holiday, yeah.
Well, the view was, I think, that they would police it themselves effectively, because if anyone took advantage and took like 20 weeks holiday a year, then the other team members would say, like, you're not playing the game, So it would kind of police itself.
And did it?
The idea behind it, but I don't know whether they still do it or what happened. I don't know. So
sounds like an honesty bar, which is ultimately flawed, isn't it? Really.
An interesting idea, though, and there have been lots of experiments over the years of larger companies trying these various things. Obviously, at the moment, it's very topical because partly because of COVID, but also partly because of the trend in employment, I think, over the last 15 years or so. So I've had a look at this and broken the question down, because it's where can you work in the future that's good for you. So it's about the individual, the employee. And so I've broken it down to three areas: location, fulfillment, and behavior. And I just want to talk initially about, because if I talk about all three topics, it's going to take up the whole time. So I'm just going to talk about location at the moment, because that's what's interesting for me as running a commercial property enterprise. And so that's the main thing there, of course. What's on the mind of everybody really is how office work is changing. And basically, with the arrival and the sudden arrival of Zoom and Microsoft Teams and the others, people have realized, because they've been forced to because of COVID lockdown restrictions, that it is possible to work a team with all the team working from home. One of my sons, for example, who works in the city council, has a team of over 10 people, and they've not been in the office for over a year. They've all worked from their homes in various parts of the country, and he's just recruited someone from Leicester, and they did an online recruitment that he hasn't actually met her, and they've recruited her into the team, and she'll be working from Leicester, working locally for the Oxford, for the city council as it happens. So
and they may never meet her, I suppose, in the flesh.
They may never meet. That's right. And of course, what they do is they meet every day for team meetings online. And that has massive implications for offices. And the likes of PricewaterhouseCoopers would have very expensive offices in the heart of the main cities in the country, which would be hugely expensive. So they'll be saving themselves a fortune by not having to pay the rent on those office buildings going into the future. So it makes sense for them. It was on the news, I think, yesterday that there's, maybe not the news, but I saw it on TV that there's quite a lot of people now looking to move to Cornwall. And this isn't any more about buying holiday homes, this is about moving there to live, because they can work from Cornwall just as easily, and be doing work which otherwise would be in London, but actually be doing it from Cornwall, living in Cornwall. And maybe one day a fortnight you go to to the office, and that's doable from further away. So that has the impact of spreading out people out, and it panders towards this idea of localism. You know, we're able to live and work in a locality of our choosing, which are presumably is going to be good for you because you can choose where you want to live, and also be contributing to that community. Whereas as a holiday home, you're not really contributing to the community, you're just taking up space that locals can't then afford. So, but I think the thing that I heard a few weeks ago was this idea that the use of offices in the future will become a mix to suit the individual. So some will work from home, some will work from in the office, traditional way, and the in-betweeny would be having like a local satellite office, like a serviced office where you can work, and that would really suit people who can't work from home for various reasons. There are quite a lot of workers who are living in houses of multiple occupation, for example, or living with their parents, or living in houses with young children, where it's just not practical, or the house might be too small. So. And then the other angle, of course, is factory work. And you would think, well, with a factory, you can't, you have to be there to work on the line or whatever it might be. But that's changing as well. There's a company called Arrival in Bicester who announced the idea of assembling. What they do is they build electric vans and buses. They've just started a startup company, but quite a big one, and they're going to have quite an impact, I think. And they're talking about, rather than having one factory that makes 100,000 vehicles, they're going to have 10 factories making 10,000 vehicles, which and they'll be spread around the country. And effectively, they'll be producing vehicles for their locality. Mm-hmm. So again, it's localism, and you're able to, it spreads things out a bit. So that's quite a way that things changing. And of course, there are other kinds of work where people are required to be on location. For example, care work or construction work, and I don't know how that's going to pan out in the future. I don't really see any change in that at the moment. But there is one thing that I do want to say, just to finish. I promise, I'm sorry, I'm taking quite a long time, but just to finish. I just heard about a new initiative today from Arrival, actually. And Arrival, as you may know, are going to start making electric vans. They're kind of box-shaped vans. And what they're going to be doing is bringing the office to you. So you, they'll have a van, and they'll be able to deliver it out on your street. So you don't have to work from your home. You can walk into the van, and they're working in partnership with Deliveroo. So the Deliveroo rider on a bike would find the van, source the van, park the bike in the back of the van, drive the van to the location, drop it off. There'll be a locking mechanism, and then the person who's using it can come out of their house, enter the code, get into the van, and that will be their office. And they can use that for, by the hour for as long as they want. Take their laptop in. There'll probably be a printer they can plug into. Maybe a slightly bigger van would have video conferencing facilities in it. And it ties in quite well with the low traffic neighbourhoods that are currently being rolled out in Oxford at the moment. And of course, it's great because you're able to focus in one place. You're away from the distractions of the home, and so that can work really well. And of course, that could work for workshops as well, where people are doing small scale sub-assembly, for example. A kit of parts could be put into the van, and then that's what you could do. It's brilliant. A great partnership between Arrival and Deliveroo.
Well, hopefully Deliveroo share price increases after yesterday's tumble, but I'm sure that's a minor blip. Brilliant, Mike. Well, thanks for that sort of insight on the commercial property side of things. Jonathan, you're busy creating working spaces and other spaces to go in any space, really. Tell us a little bit more about Green Unit, and we'll get Rowan in to tell us a little bit more about how all this impacts on the residential property market, because it'd be good to find out how, Mike was talking about moving to Cornwall. Does that mean that people won't have a second home anymore? They'll stay in Cornwall. They won't live near the office anymore. Heard yesterday for someone that works in the Leeds office, but has spent the whole of the last year on the South Coast and we never go back to the Leeds office. So will there be regional offices anymore? So it'd be good to get your input on changing trends in the residential market, Rowan. But Jonathan, tell us a little bit more about Green Unit and how
Mm.
you see Green Unit providing a solution going forward.
Yeah, I'm very, very hot on this at the moment, and following very nicely on the tail of Mike's interesting assessment of where things are. So Green Unit manufacture a modular sustainable building that we deliver to sites in sections. It's virtually complete when it leaves the factory. It's assembled. And indeed, the reverse principles are true. It can also be picked up and moved on. So very flexible. Deliveroo don't no, we get craneage companies in to do that. And I simplify it slightly, but really just trying to keep tight to the principles of what we're talking about this morning. The idea is that we find, and we're in the process of approaching a big organization, another loss-making organization called WeWork, who are part of the SoftBank group. And what we're trying to do is to reverse the principle that or the mantra that they've used, since they started. There are other players in the market like Regus as well, where everybody travels in from suburbia on crowded trains into the center of the city, and it's a stark reversal, isn't it, of that principle that we see now. Lord only knows what's going to happen to Canary Wharf, but people are now being given opportunities to work in the area that they live. It's not, I think, clear yet how employers are going to work policy on this. My guess is there's going to be a hybrid, probably 1 or 2 days a week in the office, and then you can more or less work from home. But then, and here's to the point, there's an issue, I think, for a lot of people. Mike's touched on it already, of working from home. The space can be quite confined. I think more importantly, actually, it's the isolation and the potential concerns that employers should have around mental health. And it's probably really subtle. So it's not like one day you're mentally agile and the next day you cave in. Over time, it could have quite a debilitating impact. So here's to the point. Let's look at what residential neighborhoods have in the way of small pockets of land. We're currently talking to Oxfordshire County about pockets of land that they have. We're also talking to them about pockets of land that they have in the city as well, that could take one of our buildings. We may or may not do it under the auspice of a relationship with WeWork, but our buildings are delivered and they can be used. You can pay for a seat. The employer essentially can pay for an employee's seat in that building, and to give people an opportunity to work remotely from where they live. And then if that pocket of land is only been planning has only been granted on a temporary basis, then after the 2 years or whatever it's been, I would reckon 2 years would be a sensible timeline. The building can be picked up, put on an articulated lorry and moved to another position which is vacant and available. So that's the plan.
Fantastic. So Rowan, are we going to see lots of pockets of land or lots of back gardens with Jonathan's units in delivered on?
Potentially or similar. I mean, I think just from the last two speakers, there's quite a lot I could cover on this topic. And I'll start by talking about the working practices and how we're working. And I'm an employer who just kind of lets staff do what they want. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because you've timed this perfectly, just as my staff are now all arriving as I'm about to speak, and the office is suddenly going to get really noisy and distracting for me. at 10 o'clock in the morning. And so we have a kind of start at 9:30-ish and finish at 5-ish. And for me, the ish factor is really open. I kind of couldn't care less. So it's as long as the properties are getting listed, sold and let, feedbacks are being done, fish are getting fed, coffee machines cleaned. I don't really care when the shutters are up or down. And I think I'm relatively unusual, but that I think is now an attitude that's becoming more prevalent amongst employers through the pandemic, understanding that people can be productive from home. However, what I also understand from my own industry, which is obviously estate agency, but which applies to a lot of other sectors. So I don't know, hospitality or retail when it's based in real estate rather than online, is that those jobs have to be done. They have to be done in situ. So people do have to come into a workplace because we're serving a local community. Our clients are local. The houses we're doing are local, and it kind of makes sense for us to come into one place to do that. We can't really do what we do from home, or at least not full time from home. And I've also found from a mental health point of view that we actually, I think we want to be in the office. We enjoy being back in the office together. It's good for the soul, and it's good to have banter and conversation, and we've got relationships with each other that allow us to kind of thrive. And actually, Jonathan's just touched it, but what I worry about, or to be honest, what I expect is going to happen if people are working remotely, is that they're going to gradually become despondent, detached. It's going to be hard to get the sort of the one-on-one care at work that you might get from your employer on a normal basis. So what I do think is that there is going to be change. I think people are expecting kind of rapid change, and some change happens rapidly. But I think what we're going to see is perhaps models that will become very normal in a few decades' time. There'll be some radical uptake of that now, moving everything distantly, allowing people to go and work from Cornwall, for example, and live. But actually it'll be relatively rare. I think that people are going to probably fall back into the pattern of staying where they live and work roughly locally, or especially if it's hybrid, if it's only going to the office 2 days a week. I don't think people are going to disappear off to Cornwall and do it necessarily if they're only having to commute twice a week, for example. So I think before my battery runs out, I'm going to have to plug this in, or I might just ask my colleague Claire, do us a favour before I disappear off this recorded podcast.
I thought the plant was going to say something then. Is Claire the plant?
No, absolutely not. Don't say that. Not if she's listening. So what I do think is going to happen in terms of the work, working from pods that Jonathan's talking about, is that we might see that in some of these commercial buildings now, retail buildings that, when people talk about the death of the high street, and a lot of businesses are moving off the high street, there's just a lot of commercial space that's now empty. And is that sort of commercial space that's already there in situ in cities, is that going to be taken up by these sort of hubs where people can congregate and work as much as anything to maintain good mental health whilst they're working?
Jonathan mentioned makes some interesting points for him. Jonathan mentioned earlier Canary Wharf, and I suppose if you think of an area that has people living and working in it, it's somewhere like Canary Wharf is a pretty good example of that. But I read yesterday that the area that would normally have 100,000 people using the bars and restaurants and everything is down to about 6,000. Now, whilst you think a lot of those 100,000 will probably work in that area as well, they're saying there's bar after bar after bar with shutters up, not reopening, etc. So I suppose it depends on the number of people, doesn't it, that are in that particular area, and whether it can support the infrastructure that's already in place. Or are we going to see a complete dilution of the number of bars and restaurants in places? Maybe. It depends how many people stay around. I mean, at the moment we're in a pandemic where people can't go out and use the bars and restaurants. But if that space, let's say a big commercial centre now, if the commerce is going to go, if these are going to deconstruct themselves, go into smaller hubs all around the country, which is a perfectly good idea from a socio-economic point of view anyway. What then happens to that space? Is it going to, if it's not going to be commercial space, does it then become residential space, for example?
Are there going to be enough people wanting to live in that space if there isn't the work there? You know, is London going to be a city of 15 million people if there aren't jobs right there in London for people to stay in? If there are, if people do stay there in London because they want to be in London, why do they want to be in London if the work's not there? And if they do stay, does that then raise the prospects of all of the bars, restaurants, and hospitality businesses that are then there? So it's a tough one to predict. I can't believe in places, say like London or Oxford, for example, where we are, that we are going to have a mass exodus. It's a place that people enjoy living in for various reasons, not just for work. So, you know, are people going to leave Oxford and go and shoot off to to Cornwall? I mean, it's a lovely idea, by the way. But I suspect there'll still be enough of a life in these kind of cities and metropolitan areas that is going to maintain those sorts of those kinds of businesses on high streets, the bars, restaurants, cafes, when we get back to a kind of normal life where we can go out and socialise again.
I think it's also. I mean, I think of Oxford as one example of many. Oxford is not a huge employment hub. I mean, we've got the university and everything that's centered around that, but there's an awful lot of commuter traffic going from Oxford to Reading to London. So I'm assuming a lot of that will stop. I think we're going to have to see what unfurls post lockdown to see how behavior changes. So it's then a case of, okay, so people aren't commuting to London anymore as much, if at all. Where are they going to work? Are they going to work in their small Oxford flat, or are they going to seek alternatives? So it might be, for example, that Monument Business Park, Mike's business, starts to look at a model of hot desking for single people who pay for a chair for maybe a couple of days a week to go and work in a very pleasant rural surround. That would, to my mind, be quite a distinct possibility.
I can say we are doing that, and it's not as though we haven't tried that in the past. And originally, over 30 years ago, my father and I were looking at. We have some houses there, and we were looking at extending the houses to put a workshop on the side of the house, so that people could work from home, so a home work studio effectively. But there was no demand for it. And then we looked at hot desking about 5 years ago, and again, no demand for it in a rural area. It's something which is, I think, peculiar to cities, and mainly because people in the rural areas probably got more space in their home than those people who live in the cities. So in the cities, you're more likely to want to get out of your home into a local serviced office environment or a hot desk environment. But there's no doubt that things have changed. I mean, I remember looking back at going to Brookes University probably 10 years ago, and I was at a meeting in a meeting room which had a glass wall that overlooked a student cafe area. You probably know it, in the main sort of foyer area of Brookes on Headington Hill. And I looked down, simply amazed that the number of students there who are working in 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 6s around a pod, around a desk or a table, all with their laptops, and basically team working or individual working in a cafe environment. And I could see then that was, if they're doing that as students, they're going to want to take that into their working environment. And maybe they couldn't do that in the past because maybe their employer wouldn't allow them. And the pandemic has created and will continue to create a shift in employment patterns, particularly in the office working market. And whilst I accept, of course, that not everybody is going to be able to commute to Cornwall, there are going to be some people who will be able to. And it's that subtle change which is going to be, I think, more permanent in the future. And I don't think anyone can predict exactly what's going to happen, but there will be changes based around what works for the individual. And working for the individual in this case means I don't have to spend all those hours of the day and cost in commuting into the office when I can actively put those hours into working for my company from the home. And from the company's point of view, oh my goodness, we don't have to pay for an expensive office in the city. We can reduce. So for example, a large organization with, say 20 teams of people may only have 4 offices, and the teams will come in 1 day a week to meet using the same offices. So it's a kind of hot desk with a desk with the teams, and you reduce the size of the offices by 5 times. A 5 times reduction. You only need 20% of the offices you would otherwise have had. That could all be done, and I'm sure will be done by some people, but it won't be done by everybody. And so there will be this change, which will be slow, but I think it will be permanent. Yeah.
You say, I mean, I think back in probably July, when China came out of lockdown, and dates, I'm awful with dates over the last year. Everything seems to have blurred into about 30 years worth of a year. So I'm not sure exactly when it was, but Chinese, correct me if I'm wrong, apparently it's traditional. They don't eat lunch at their desks. They go out to bars and restaurants in the cities. During lockdown, those that went into the office did actually, they had to eat in the office because obviously the restaurants and bars were shut. But when they were open again, they flooded back. And the point was made about muscle memory that, when things go back to any sort of normality, that we'll just get back to normal. I don't know, Mike, you said that it's been such a long time now and people have got used to the benefits of this. Do you agree with that? That muscle memory will take us back to what we were, or do you think a lot of us have learned so much in the last year that we'll go forward with our new scenario? There'll be a bit of each, won't there? I mean, some people want to go back to as they were, and some people will be happy with the change. I mean, you talk about China, but you could also take the example 30 years ago, people would go for a liquid lunch every day. And that's pretty well stopped now. That hardly happens anymore. So things change. Things do change, and they're driven by what the individual wants and what benefits the company, I think. So,
I mean, I think the B4 organisation are probably a reasonable example of how attitudes are changing, and you're betting, Richard, on virtual. You've put a huge amount of creative thought into how to re-engineer your organisation to do exactly what we're doing now. That doesn't require us to come to one of your breakfast brunches in any physical way. So you've decided that this is the way it's going to be going forward, I would suggest.
I don't actually. The thing is, I think this is how it has to be now. But actually, as soon as we can get back in the Ashmolean and have a B4 brunch,
I think Richard still needs to pull out the gin and the tonics. That's true.
Yeah, and I think that's what. Well, personally, that's what I am missing, that social interaction, the physical social interaction, and I'm zoomed out, and I. So that's why I think. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's definitely some amount of change that's here to stay. I think we'll progressively get there, but I think the pace of change is going to be slower because it's going to reverse fairly quickly now. And then there'll be this whole debate about, what was better, pandemic life or this life that we've now reverted back to. And the change will come over the next 20 years, I would think, rather than the next 2 years as we move into it. But yeah, I mean, certainly if we can get the opportunity to run events, we'll do so, but we can't even really give any thought to that. But I think certainly what we'll do is have bigger events less frequently, for occasions that people look forward to, and you can get more people there. But then we had guys from the Retail, Hospitality and Events Hub last week talking about the psychology of meeting again. What will people's thoughts be about meeting, touching plates, eating food, etc., with other people present? So it's going to be difficult, as you say, Rowan. It's not going to happen. We're not going to know what the real picture is going forward for a while yet. But guys, thank you very much for joining us. Jonathan, do you want any final points you'd like to make? Quick sales pitch for Green Unit.
Well, changes afoot. I think it's partly also about management attitude and how managers feel they can manage staff remotely, and it's a bit of a mind shift for them. So it's trust.
Interesting. Mike?
Yes, I was going to say something similar. I said at the beginning that it's about where can you work in the future that's good for you. Isn't just about location. It's also about feeling fulfilled in the workplace, and it's also about how you're treated in the workplace, so behaviour. So what Rowan was saying about allowing his staff to come in when they want and leave when they want, trusting that they will get the work done in the time that's available to them. which is kind of how I've always worked with in my business as well. We don't have any timekeeping at all. I could talk a lot about that, but the fulfillment side is really, are you doing something? Is the company that you're working for doing something that you are enthralled by, that motivates you? So where you work in the future is partly who you're working for, not where you're working, but what they actually do that drives you and motivates you. So we haven't touched on that, and that all angles towards well-being at work, which you mentioned right at the beginning, I think, Richard or Jonathan did.
We'll maybe have to come to that in a future business brunch, but thank you, Mike. Thanks, Jonathan. And Rowan, you've had half an hour to come up with an outro in verse.
Unfair.
Pretty disappointed if you
totally
can't do
unfair.
it.
Oh, hang on. What does Rossa rhyme with?
Oh my God!
I just can't
Don't
think.
even start. Don't even go. Yeah. My God.
Flosser. Flosser.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
It's all I can think of off the top of my head. No, what I'd say from an employer's point of view, where do people want to live and work? I think we have to be fair on employers. Employers need something done. We need people to be productive. But I think the question that employers should be asking their employees is, where do you want to live, and how do you want to work? Can you produce what I need you to produce? And if you can see that happening, if that means Cornwall or if that means Cowley, and it can happen, then that's what you need to implement for them. And I think that's really the way I look at it as an employer. My staff couldn't do the job they do for me in Cornwall, so it's just impossible. But if I was an accountancy firm and it's all going digital anyway, then why not? So yeah, I think definitely conversations to be had. But from my point of view, it's if you could be productive elsewhere and enjoy life and maintain your mental health, then all for it.
Excellent. And I hear the Cornwall accent creeping into your LinkedIn posts.
No, that is Suffolk. That is Suffolk. But
that's right. Suffolkisms, all very similar.
Yeah. So people don't actually know where Ipswich is. So I forgive you. I've had all sorts, including Australia. So.
Great. Well, good stuff. Thanks for joining us, Mike, Jonathan, and Rowan, and we look forward to catching up with you soon.
All right, Matt.
Thank you.